Welcome to IGS Stand Together. I'm John DeClerc. During this episode, we're going to talk to Mark Anderson of the North American Limousin Foundation and Luke Lynn with Five Rivers Cattle Feeding. As longtime executive director of the association, Mark also brings valuable experience as a representative in the feeding sector. Thanks for being here, Mark and Luke. I'd like to talk with you today about the importance of genetic evaluation on all levels of the beef cattle industry. So, as a longtime IGS member, what value has your organization, its producers, seen as a result of combining genetic evaluations and doing this multi-breed evaluation and pooling your data together with other breeds?
You bet. No, it's a good question, John, and it's really been pretty dramatic change. If we look back when IGS was started and what we've come through, it's all about EPD accuracy and phenotype gatherage, if you may say it that way. But the ability to combine with the 25 other breeds and that information and compare all the phenotypes, I look at the impact it has on common sires. And I think just in our breed, I mean, if we got 2.2 million cattle, and there's like, if I remember correctly, 4,000 or 5,000 sires that are in other databases. So we're getting those phenotypes as well. And what it's really done the last 5 years, it's helped us, now that we're genotyping cattle and we've got that advantage as well. But the IGS model has really helped us accelerate genetic change. For a breed like ours, if we wanted to increase our growth and having the ability to compare to others and see where we may be deficient and what we need to improve upon, that happened a lot faster being a partner with IGS for just being in the seed stock industry as we try to build cattle for the commercial cattle industry and down the chain.
Absolutely. I'm always a guy that I like data, right? And I used to be a professor, so every year I'd look at the MARC data, that meat animal research, and they would do a crossbreed EPD adjustments. And I have been astounded at the genetic progress that the Limousin breed has made. And you talked about that, Mark. It seems like sometimes breeders get a little nervous about dipping, kind of when you have a single breed evaluation, you're only compared to your contemporaries.
That's right.
You can be kind of a big fish in a small pond, but then you throw yourself into a IGS, and we've got 24 million head of cattle here. It does probably show you a little bit more of that true light where you rank, so you can maybe address and make some changes, and your breeders have definitely done that. Yeah,
and it's people that have paid attention and done their homework and their matings. We're trying to fit cattle for the commercial cattle industry and what the market's telling us, not only for these guys, but the consumers. So a breed like ours and all breeds have things they're good at, things they're not so good at, and what can you improve upon. We needed more marbling, and we've been able to advance that not only in our hybrid, but our purebred population. And you can compare that directly with the Semitoles, and of course we can't be Angus, but like your breed, we'll drag some ribeye and some feed efficiency advantages in the cross out there. And I think the ability to try to make what the consumer and the marketplace demands, and then we were talking earlier about the money so big and what these guys face with on finance and break-evens and feeding cattle to larger outweights, that all plays a role.
Yep.
And those things we can accelerate quicker because of what IGS does for the whole industry and the seed stock side.
Yeah, it's in today's cattle industry, standing still is the same as going backwards.
That's right.
And so you mentioned that connectivity. We've got related animals in the Limousin population that are related to the Semitole Association. We pool our data together, and now all of a sudden we've got a 2 to 3-fold increase in terms of our accuracy. And we can make that kind of genetic progress faster, that we can help the guys like Luke, and we've got less cows, and with smallest cow herd we've had since the 1950s, yet we're still producing more pounds of beef today. We had 45 million beef cows in 1970. Today we're south of 28 million beef cows, and we'll make more pounds of beef because of genetic progress that we've made at IGS and seed stock producers elsewhere.
And also at a higher price.
Because
we're doing what the consumers want. Filling the need.
Absolutely, and a lot of that comes back to grading. We get more cattle to grade choice and prime, and consumer demand is rising. I think we're highest consumer demand since 1988. And we see cattle that are doing over 85% choice and prime.
Industry's doing 85%.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
What's crazy is that we're producing more prime than we are select. And when I started in a packing plant in Kansas, it was 65, 70% select, and a handful, you'd see a prime once in a while.
Yep.
It was kind of Christmas, and everything else was choice. And how the industry has evolved from that is just amazing.
Absolutely.
And it's all due to genetics. It's not, and weight.
For sure. Yeah, more days on feed, but definitely genetics. And Mark, you talked about coming together with IGS, and sometimes your breed might not look as shiny in a particular area, and you might identify a weakness. But to Luke's point, where we've got an industry today that is 85% choice or prime or better, right? If you don't realize where you rank, and if you can't make improvements, whether it's growth or reproduction or marbling, you're going to get left behind. Yeah. And the cattle business now, and we were talking before the screen about just interest rates and how expensive it is to buy these 5-weight feeder calves away, or that are $2,900. I can't afford to buy genetics that aren't going to get the job done in the real world.
And it's true. I think if you get on, Luke and I kind of started out together at Cattle Facts. That's back when cattle might have graded 50% choice, and that was yeah.
In Nebraska.
And a fat steer, you might have 1250 might have caught it. If you were south on I-40, it might have been 1180, and look where we've come. But that ability to manage risk, one thing that I think the industry talks about, how big we're making cattle, and they'll say, well, look at the profitability. Well, it's not the profitability just necessarily with what we're paying or they're paying for feeder cattle. You have to get to those weights to get the rollback. Like you said, the interest rate's higher. You look at the interest tab now with the extended days on feed and just rolling back the initial purchase price.
Exactly.
Then they've got to manage a hedge break even. But what makes a difference, or I know it did for me, I could sleep better at night if I had cattle genetically performing that were converting, that would work on the grid. Those cattle you can manage risk on. It's the surprise cattle that are genetically inferior that create risk for this sector, as well as the cow-calf sector. But more so in that deal, you miss a hedge and your basis off, you can miss your basis $2 a hundredweight or more. But if you miss a closeout and a cost of gain by a dime, it's lethal.
With us, we have the power of the numbers like you guys are talking about in terms of the 24 million head in the database. We'll market 1.5 million cattle, something like that. And so, we're always looking at the deviation around that, the mean, and trying to really manage the mean. And the outliers, you try to understand why we had outliers, but the reality is that you're really managing to the mean is what you're doing in the feedlots. And because of that, we are taking cattle a lot bigger, and those weights, because when you have cattle that won't go to that weight, won't go to 1550, 1600, and in some cases even some guys are using 1700 today, which holy cow, it really is, everything's got to be aligned and everything's got to fire on all cylinders, because it's not trivial making an animal weigh 1,550 pounds. You got to have intake, you got to have the frames fit. You look at when you ask an animal to be, project an animal to be 1,550 pounds, bone, foot, all those things really start to come into it, because all of a sudden you're just, you're 60, 70, 80 days more on feed, and that all those things really come into play a lot more than just, we'll do 100 days on them,
Absolutely. And you guys started off at Cattle Facts, and I was thinking about where outweights are now. I'm sure that probably would have seemed a little interesting, but we always talk about supply and demand. And I remember when I was a kid growing up, I'm like, well, prime's worth so much because it's only 2% of supply. Like if we get up more than that, we're going to see it tail off. And we do 7-8% more percentage prime in the U.S., and the spread gets bigger every year. It goes against the supply and demand
at a higher price. The market's taking.
Yeah.
You've got a couple of people that are buying, that clean up the prime market every week and suck it up because they've got customers that go into their stores and buy it. Mm-hmm. And so the demand is there. Really, you think about it, there was a point a couple of weeks ago where choice selects flipped. Mm-hmm. Well, it really wasn't a function of demand for middles and prime. It was more a function of the ends, because we were, when you take these cattle to 1,550, 1,600 pounds, the end result is you're going to get a lot of trim. 50-50 trim. Yeah. And to make that 50-50 trim valuable, you've got to add it to lean. And so if you don't have enough cows getting killed, somebody's going to go look at a select chuck or something like that, because that's the only way you can upgrade that product into a hamburger piece. And so it drove that for a minute. And the spread's pretty narrow right now just because that demand for lean to mix with the 50/50s, because you've got a situation right now where, when you make these cattle that big, they're going to have plenty of fat on them, which Packer is willing to pay for but
sure.
then he blends it off,
Yep.
with the lean product. And so we really need that lean product to push this hamburger out. Otherwise, 50/50 would be, almost worth nothing.
Absolutely. And 53% of what the American consumers eats is ground beef, right?
Exactly.
And so
exactly.
every now and again you hear some folks get a little nervous about when we import lean trim from South America, but to your point, we got to blend it together with that
That's the only way
50/50
it
to
works.
upgrade the value.
You look at where 90s are, they're $4 plus or minus. 50s are, $1.80, something like that. You think about that blend and where all the opportunities are. The market's really kind of bifurcated. You either got hamburger or middles, prime middles, and there's nobody really talks about any of the other stuff, and so it's really become a very interesting market.
Absolutely. So on your standpoint here, Luke, so how is genetic information used in a feedlot setting?
So I was laughing because you were talking about the mark data. We will look at that mark data just because, most of the cattle we get are either auction barn or order buyer described. We have handfuls of cattle that we get that are producer, some kind of producer relationship, but most of the cattle are just, kind of a range. And so we do look at the mark data to say, okay, this is what Mark's saying about different cattle. We use a lot of our own historical database, but what's interesting is that, when, like in the Southeast, when, say in the late 80s, early 90s, a lot of those cattle were really more situated for what the conditions were. So a lot of Bos Indicas, big framey kind of cattle, not a lot of grade in those cattle. And when they started putting more Angus and more genetics into those cattle to grade, all of a sudden those cattle's values started rising. And so what's interesting is today is that 15 years ago, we would have spent a tremendous amount of time in the north trying to buy choice grading cattle. Today, we get those same kinds of cattle in Kansas, Oklahoma, Tennessee, and it's because of the genetics.
Absolutely. And I always think, I obviously used to be a nutritional consultant, what I did for a living, and so I remember looking at some of my closeout sheets, and I'm sure you see it all the time too, Luke. It's wild, the difference in value in a pen of cattle between, you got a steer that does 67, 68%, dress and he's prime versus one that's 61, 62% dress and select. I mean, there will be north of $1,000 spread between those cattle. And, it's always interesting to me as I think about how's the feedlot industry going to evolve. Do you think we're going to see some more scrutiny on some of these, on genetics or trying to identify it? Because, boy, the cattle are really expensive these days.
So right now, if somebody offered me cattle, I'd have to say, I need them because the numbers are just so tight. You really can't pick and choose. Where I do think that value is people that are retaining ownership, people that are going into programs. Those kinds of cattle are the ones you obviously want to own. And, we end up feeding a lot of the other ones. And so, we've got to manage that from that standpoint because we use processes like sorting and different kinds of things to try and get the cattle closer to what the program is. So we have to do that. But yeah, we pay a lot of attention to the genetics. It's right now, unfortunately for us, beggars can't be choosers.
I definitely understand.
They do have an advantage though. You have a report card on the feed yard side. That closeout data, we're in the predictive business with EPDs, trying to make better cattle, but you knew certain sets of cattle are, I can give a little bit more for these because of what they are genetically, whether it's feed conversion or carcass results, but you've still got good yard managers that know how to evaluate cattle. They've kind of got to know where to stop or break even at 15 or 16 or 1,700. Where's too big going to be?
We're getting there. We're getting there. I mean, Holly said that when we were at 1,400 pounds, but you start to think about that curve of growth, and we've just trended higher since since I was in grad school or college. You know, you just watched it go, and you'd say, well, at some point it's going to stop. But I think just from the standpoint of you look at some of the data from and you're starting to say, you know, these cattle are at 1,700 pounds. You know, we're maxing. I mean, it's kind of like Scotty on the Enterprise. We're giving it all she's got, Captain, because I think I worry that if you try to push these cattle any bigger, we're going to need something to bridge that with technology, because I just think, you know, if you look at the hearts, the lungs,
weight, the health risk,
everything.
A dead slip now is almost like a coffin.
Yeah.
I mean,
oh yeah, especially when they're fat. You know, that's
right.
like, you know, there's $4,000 out the window, $4,000 grand.
Adios.
You know.
And I do wonder too, because the dynamics of the market we're in, where corn's pretty cheap. I mean, if you look at with the price of inflation, corn's the cheapest it's been since the mid 2000s, right?
Yeah.
And so cattle are worth so much. We don't have a lot of them, as you mentioned. We got all sorts of yard space, so it's not like you're trying to kick them out to bring in the next group. And heck, the next group might cost you so much.
That's
you just
exactly,
rather hang on to the ones you got.
Is
you
there
know?
the swap forces you to carry them, and you know, we built an industry that really drives on pounds, and end result is we'll keep trying to figure out ways to maximize, you know, probably put more processes in step. To your point, within a pin, we know that there's 200-300 pounds variation in that pin. You know, as cattle value continues to increase, you're going to spend more time on the individual, saying, you know, how much more can that individual go rather than the pin. Right now, most of the conversations are the pin, but as value increases, you know, it focuses to individuals rather than pin.
No, that makes sense, and that might be where maybe some more of that genetic merit would definitely come through. I've even thought it's been interesting to watch. You guys obviously are well attuned. Our industry is so innovative, and to watch the industry continue to evolve, the packing plants that are now fit to where they can handle these bigger carcasses, or we see people pulling apart different muscles. You know, there was never a flat iron steak when I was a kid, but as these carcasses are getting bigger, we're fabricating them a little different to accommodate for it.
Like these end caps too. I mean, you just look at what's been done with those. It's a whole new world. The knife's still a pretty good tool.
Yep.
No, I agree. I mean, that's the thing is that, you know, you think about when I was in a packing plant as an intern, the way you handled the cattle, the way the cattle were broke, the processing floor, you know, all those things. It's just so different than today because, you know, you've had to put interventions in for food safety. You've had to do all these things, and it's just amazing to me the ability of of people to innovate and say, you know what, we can do this, we can do that, and here's the opportunity. And I think that's what's, you know, that's what's the cool part about the beef business is that you've got a lot of really smart people looking at this, trying to figure out how to do it better.
Yeah. So from your vantage point, Luke, obviously what we're trying to do at IGS, we got that multi-breed genetic evaluation, so you can directly compare a Limousin bull to a Simmental bull to a Shorthorn bull to a Gelbvieh bull. Does that, and similar to what the mark data tells you, right? Being able to have that direct comparison, does that have value to you? So
more than that, for me, it's you guys have got a database that you can go select outliers across all these breeds. You've got the power of the data.
That's right.
To me, it's more about the power of your data for the breeders than it is
changing
for me.
the population,
exactly,
the supply
because
of cattle.
The thing is that, you know, you're always looking for those outliers, and if you have that, if you can pull that out of that 24 million head to find that genetic outlier that you need for that specific thing, that's really the power to me. It's not so much what it does for me, it does how do you move, you find that outlier, you propagate him, you move your mean, and that means something to me. You know, the problem is in small breeds, and you know, I've always said is that the population's so small you can't find that outlier. Because you can't find it, you can't make the genetic you know, movement that other breeds can, and if you don't have that, you can't make. I mean, to your point of, you know, you constantly need to be moving. That database, the ability to tease that, you know, because I think that's really where the innovation comes from in the next 5-10 years. You look at machine learning, you look at AI, and you start parsing data. You know, when I started with Continental Grain 32 years ago, we had a guy that was basically, we called him a numbers guy, and he was an insurance actuary, and we would ask questions about the market and say, you know, what if this happens and this happens with weight? And he'd say, okay, and he'd go away, he'd run a program over the weekend, and 4 days later he'd have something sitting in front of you and you'd say, well, that's not quite what I wanted, but here, let's do this, do this. And by the time you got done answering the question, you were gone. Today, between Power BI and machine learning, you plug in a data set and you're 15 seconds later, you're modeling,
Yep.
And so the power of digging into that data and finding those little crumbs that lead you to something that's an aha, I think that's really where the value is. It's the 24 million head of observations, all the phenotypes, everything that ties into it. To me, if somebody called, I'd probably say, oh, that's nice. But what it really means is that we're going to go from 82 or 83 or 84% choice to 90, 91, and still have conversion and health and all those cool things that go with it. And so that's where I see it.
It's finding the freaks to improve the cattle population, so they've got a better pool to pick from, really. And I think quality grade's a testament to that, because just like we talked when it was 55% choice, the breed associations got after it. Of course, CAB was the big driver. There's no doubt about it, and it sent the signal. But what it's also done, it's changed demand for product. You and I used to come to these things in the 80s, and we were losing market share to pork, poultry. I mean, it was just on the decline, and as Luke said, now we're selling this volume and these higher percentages of choice and prime at a higher level, over $9 a pound retail, and the market still is asking for more. So quality sells, but those kind of items, and maybe red meat yields next. I mean, and the growth, when you get to the ranch level, they want a cow bred and a live calf on the ground, but there's so many users in the 7 sectors down the chain, we got to think about it all.
So right now I'm with the cow-calf guy. More calves on the ground?
Yep.
I'm all in on it. I think that's, that head count's really important. That's what drives our business. And I think that the red meat yield deal is with the talk of looking at the yield grade equation.
Yep.
Yield grade equation, when you think about it, well, as a professor, I mean, it's, you sit there and you have to keep a straight face when you talk about.
Oh yeah, that paper was written in 1960. It's 162 carcasses from the 1950s, right?
With a linear regression.
Regression, and it's just so outdated, right? And I think, Dr. Warner's data would show that ribeye area is 3% accurate at projecting what the actual edible product is within a carcass. And breeders are smart. They respond to incentives, and they say, if you're only going to measure muscle in one place, then we'll put a 14-inch ribeye in them and take muscle out everywhere else and kind of beat the system, and that's what happened. And cattle, obviously, our maturity patterns are way different now. The fattening process, the growth patterns or the growth curve is just way different.
When you look at that data set, I think the 800-pound carcass was the lightest thing in the data set at that time, and so they used that linear model for that. And the reality is 800 pounds. Somebody messed up. They sent them too early.
Yep, absolutely. So no, the market is changing and evolving, and I've noticed, and I'm sure you gentlemen have too, obviously quality grade is what's driving consumer demand, and we're really proud of that. But because of the packers have noticed the yield grade formula is not very accurate, the premiums for yield grade have gotten smaller, the discounts have gotten a lot smaller. So perhaps when the USDA puts in a new red meat yield formula, maybe some of those premiums or discounts get elevated. That might keep
you would
things
think
in
so
check.
with the pounds. If I'm knocking 5,000 cattle out a day, and I can, we talked about ribeye, just less than 4% of the indicator. If we look at round and 4-shank chuck, that's a lot more pounds of yield going out. We still want to make it great or keep the high quality grades, but we've got the tools now with things with IGS and genomics that we can find those freaks that can probably do both.
That's the thing is, you can, when you start parsing it, you find those unique individuals and you propagate them.
Yep.
And that's when it means something to me, is when it's propagated across large numbers. That
affect the population.
Yep. I mean, the classic example was 1407 in the Angus breed in Florida, because he was slick-haired, big rib-eyed, and had some growth. He fit in Florida because he wasn't hairy.
Yep.
And, and that's where the industry is, when you find that unique individual, all of a sudden he becomes the part. And I shouldn't have said that about Angus, but it was, but I think it's really fitting.
Absolutely.
But it describes, finding that unique outlier and how he had a place. And I think that's the power of your guys' data set is that it's such a big data set.
Oh yeah.
That you can go say, I want that one.
Yeah, and on the Angus too, it's like we realize at IGS is that breeds aren't competitors, we're crossbreeding partners.
Yes.
That's right.
And to get the growth that you need, to get the health that you need in the feed yard, for us to get the reproductive balance we need commercial producers to utilize heterosis.
The only free lunch we get at the feed yard is your heterosis.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I mean, health, all the things. I mean, we're big. I mean,
especially at these weights. Conversion rates, yield rates,
everything.
The whole thing applies.
You just need heterosis to make this thing work. I mean, you can't do it with single breeds.
So like on that, you talked about health, and obviously that's huge, and feed conversion and grade. So what metrics or what data are you looking at for cattle when they enter the finishing phase or in that feed yard?
So, we're starting to use more and more AI and looking at AI, saying, okay, cattle that came out of this area, this time of year, at these kinds of weights, how many did we ever bought? What are the observations? What does the machine guesstimate things at? And it's really interesting because as that goes, health is such a big deal. And then the second part of it is okay, if we do buy them, what kind of health protocols do we need to put in place to manage those cattle? Are they coming from an area that historically doesn't feed a lot of mineral, or is mineral deficient in something? Because we know, if you don't have the minerals, you're not going to get the response from the vaccines. And so, what do we got to do to make those cattle perform better? And so we're using location more than anything, region, time, cattle from, say, just pick a spot, cattle from the San Joaquin Valley of California in May are a lot different than cattle that are from the San Joaquin Valley in January.
Okay.
They're two totally different kinds of cattle. Same thing in Texas. Cattle out of Amarillo in January, what you're getting there.
Yes, sir.
Versus wheat pasture cattle in March and April.
Yep.
Two totally different beasts.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is interesting, using that power of data, right? And this kind of gives an opportunity that we're always encouraging commercial producers to invest in genetics, to find the right kind of cattle, let that management on sale day. Your cattle are either going to brag on you or they're going to tell on you.
That's right.
And I think when we get some more of this data coming in here, some of these folks that are doing things right are probably going to be rewarded, and those that aren't might be a little disappointed on how these new tools
100%.
are helping us.
100%. I mean, I think the thing that's eye-opening is that one of the things that I used when I was younger, you'd ask producers, well, who raises the best cattle herd? Everybody'd raise their hands, and I'm glad they have pride in their herd. But at the same time, not everybody raises, and so it's a real interesting thing on the data kind of cuts through all the noise, and at least it gives you a spot to have a conversation.
Are you guys obviously using AI to kind of build those models and make prediction equations there? Do you see it helping out elsewhere in the feed yard, with maybe predicting days on feed or animal health?
Honestly, it's really, really early days. And so we've got a handful of people that are messing with it. It really isn't into the whole management of the feed yards yet. We've got people looking at it. The thing about, I'm kind of like you, I'm a data guy. I like mean, standard deviation, and really understanding what that means. With AI, it doesn't give you that. It just tells you a solution.
Yep.
And I, when I get stuff, is it normal variation, or is it 3 or 4 standard deviations away from the mean? If it's 3 or 4, obviously we got to do something about it. But if it's mean reversion and just variation, normal variation, it becomes a real challenge. But machine learning doesn't do that, and so I think that's something that, as we mess with this and look at it and try to figure out how it works, because we're big systems, in the yards. That's really what we are, is we're managing a mean, and a lot of things in terms of intake, variation in the rash, all those things are just, and so how do we adapt that to the machine just saying it's X? Well, what's that mean? What's that really mean? And so it really opens up the idea of what is it.
I'd imagine on those AI models too, that when you are predicting, animal health is just paramount, right? It's
Yeah,
paramount to
that's
grade,
100%.
performance.
It is.
You know.
It's the basics, right? Because you got. I mean, what's heritability of marbling? 0.3, 0.4, 0.35, something like that. So 65% of the variation is environment.
Yep.
And so if that's the case, there's a lot of things we can screw up.
Yep.
I mean, Larry Core, I remember, he was always, in the early days when you'd have all these high marbling cattle, and he'd say, well, the big feed yards screw those cattle up because they don't do this, this, and this. And I was like, you're right, Larry, because the reality is every intervention we do to an animal is going to knock grading down. It's not going to improve it.
Yep.
And so at the end of the day, you're trying to balance that with, the genetics just overwhelmed the system because, but to your point, it's all about that, it's that grading piece.
Yeah.
I mean, and the health ties to it. And it's at the end of the day, that health is so important, and just trying to get those animals on the right spot, on the road.
Because parlays into everything.
Well,
feed conversion, it impacts cost of gain, it impacts marbling, all the way down the line.
Sick calves don't eat.
No, and the other thing is, as you go through it in the future, as you go to these bigger outweights and the requirement stress on the cattle like you guys talk, it's vital that those cattle got a good mineral package, and you can give them any vaccine in the world, but if they're not set up right, it's...
And lung lesions. Classic thing, lung lesions. You get a set of calves with a lot of, that had a lot of challenges. How do you really expect those cattle to go to 1650?
Oh yeah. Well, that's obviously we could talk all day about health. Even once you activate the innate immune system, it takes a pound of glucose every 6 hours to keep that going. That's a lot of feed. And even if you can give meat, they're feed efficiency tanks when they go through that. But your AI models, because health is such a big driver, is that what you guys are doing to try to look at respiratory or late fed deads?
We're spending a lot of time. These late deads and respiratories, we've got one of our vets, that's his passion right now, and really spending a lot of time. We obviously believe there's a genetic component to it, and we're finding it in lighter and lighter cattle, and so that's our big challenge to you guys as breeders, is we've got to figure that out, because somewhere in the pile there's some management solutions that we can employ to do that better.
Well, Mark, I want to ask you, so why do you believe that IGS continues to serve as the best source for genetic selection tools today?
I think for a lot of the reasons we just talked about, one, finding the pull and the crossbreed EPD comparison, but I feel like that the science team and Bruce Golden and the crew that are on board at IGS has got some of the most progressive people in the world. As Luke talked about AI, I know we're going to see some AI acceleration in the NCEs. But having the spirit of cooperation and everybody working together, we bring a lot of carcass data. We've got some people there that are heavily involved in the feedlot business, but the things you get from every breed that's a cooperator, and the ability to find those cattle like Luke talks about that can change a population. So as we start to focus on maybe some health trends, things that are real, death loss was one of the worst things I experienced and below a break even. But I always felt like it was that, feed conversion, and then after we had to start hanging cattle, what the carcass composition was like. Well, those are all the things we can make the average producer better at. And when the IGS was started, to be honest with you, when I got into this coming out of the feed yard side, I looked at EPDs and thought, well, okay. And I didn't argue them, but I look at, since IGS is in now, and I look at a 147 yearling weight, and it looks more like what a 147 yearling weight would be. You take the genomics and what's happened at IGS, John, I just think that the team and the approach in finding that kind of data pool, it's pretty valuable, and more so than people might realize.
Yeah, so the accuracy of the data driving genetic progress, breeds working together to promote crossbreeding, and hey, we're partners, we're crossbreeding partners, we're not competition.
That's
and
right.
Then that direct comparison of crossbreeds so people can make clear-headed decisions and commercial producers can make progress. So I think that's all the time we have for now. But thank you for joining us, Mark and Luke, and sharing your industry-wide insights. If you folks would like to learn more, we encourage you to visit us at internationalgeneticsolutions.com.